I just wanted to say in this chapter, like, by sharing this story, and it's been in all the biographies, that I don't think we should just brush past it. We really have to talk about it. We really have to think about what it means. How can we love our heroes and also say, that was a really fucked up thing to do, excuse my French.
The library was my space, and there was just so much.
To the Harbor Grace excursion with the boys to have a time.
Welcome to Canada.
Oh, thank you so much. It's a
Homeland of
delight.
Joni Mitchell.
Yes.
And congratulations on the book, which just came out a few days ago. And I already see some people have read it, some people have it. If you don't, go buy it. We're just so excited to have you here to tell us all about it. And in the words of the wonderful critic, Karen Rose, she called traveling an almost forensic examination of Mitchell's work and life, which I think is the perfect description for this book. So again, if I'm just giving you hints about like what you're in for when you actually read it. I think, just to start off, I think people might be surprised to find that you weren't necessarily a big Joni fan, and that you were commissioned to write this book. So can you tell me a little bit about that process? Like, when the publisher came to you, why did they feel like you were the best person to write the book?
Well, you're right. I mean, to say I wasn't a Joni fan is a bit of an overstatement. Of course, I was a Joni fan in the way that all of us are Joni fans. She's part of the fabric of our lives and, one of the great artists. But first of all, I think it had to do with my age. I'm right on the cusp of X. I guess I'm an elder X person. So I really grew up loving Debbie Harry and Chrissie Hynde and Kate Bush, my God, my goddess, Kate Bush. And so for me, those were the artists I identified with. And I think as a young person, as a teen, I associated Joni with elders, and sort of... Now that I'm an elder, but I'll tell you, the
Peanut Gallery has spoken.
Oh, but I tell you, it was just there was like a weird split. We could do a whole talk on this, Tabassum. I want to call you Tab. Is that okay?
Yeah, it's totally okay.
We could do a whole talk on just the sort of that split between X and. Sorry, boomers. Okay, boomers. The boomers who are here, but X and boomers, which is it's fictional, but it was very felt for those of us who associated ourselves with punk and new wave. So to me, Joni Mitchell was part of that counterculture era as a young person that I felt overshadowed my generation in a sense. So I had to sort of forge my own path with my own artists. At the same time, of course, I loved the canonical works. I loved Blue. I loved Hejira. But it just took me a while to come around to her centrality, I think. And then also, my other predilection is for underdogs. I really tend to favor artists who are on the margins, and like Jane Siberry, for example.
Another great Canadian.
Mary Margaret O'Hara, for example.
Another great Canadian.
These are favorites of mine, and the idea of writing about any canonical artist, writing a whole book about any canonical artist was a bit like, do we really need another one on that shelf, So I had to take a breath when I was considering this project, but then it took me a while. I actually said yes, and then I said, oh my God, what have I done? And that was a couple of years, and then I realized that this very struggle that I was having was an interesting thing to write about. Like the difference between Joni Mitchell, the myth, the legend, the icon, the unimpeachable, and Joni Mitchell, the very human, always changing, imperfect, yet still genius person and artist. So this book is sort of the story of my path, my attempt to follow her on the path that she is inhabited as the real person, but also to think about what it means to be an icon and how we deal with icons, we critics, we fans.
Amazing. And let's talk about those few years. Like here we are in the library, so among readers, people who love to read, but I feel like sometimes readers don't always know just the amount of work and time that it goes into putting together something like this. So, like I think there's so much about just the work that you've done here. It was 8 years in the making. So if someone asks you, Anne, why did it take that long? What do you have to say?
Well, there were 2 years of just being like, oh my God, what have I done? No, but then I did do a ton of research. I went to lots of archives. I spent a lot of time in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame archives in Cleveland, which are incredible. That's where I found things like Jerry Wexler's papers that had all the correspondence about Joni from the first few records that she made, and how they were going to market her, and how she resisted being marketed that way, and all that stuff. So that was really interesting. I read the entire run of Rolling Stone from her first appearance in Rolling Stone to about 1975, because I wanted to see if, she has always said, and her fans have always said, she was treated so badly by Rolling Stone, so I wanted to see how exactly she was treated, so I did that. I interviewed many, many people. I was lucky enough to get to talk to a lot of people at the Joni 75 concert, and including James Taylor, Graham Nash, and people like that. Got to interview David Crosby, R.I.P., wonderful person, but also Tom Rush, Judy Collins, at the other end of her career, Brian Blade, all these people that could help give me a full picture of Joni. All that takes time, And then there was the time I had to spend kind of figuring out how to structure the book and how to combine some memoiristic elements, cultural criticism, and biography.
Absolutely. And I want to ask you about that. You recently said, I didn't know that I needed Joni. And I love that phrasing. So tell me more about that. Was there something about her music that maybe didn't resonate with you initially? Or what was it about her work that maybe eventually struck a chord for you?
Yeah, I'm thinking about that. Well, if you only know the hits or whatever, as she herself called them on her classic hits and misses packages. If you only know the hits, they are beautiful, and they are standards, and we love them. I mean, we heard Sarah do an amazing job tonight with those songs, many of those songs. But for me, those, and they are complicated, each of those. But it was hard for me to hear those with fresh ears until I really delved into the deep cuts, and the material that hasn't been as celebrated and hasn't been in like movies where Emma Thompson learns how to feel, things like that. So it was really finding those deeper cuts that then both musically, really piqued my interest and my curiosity as I started to think about how did she put these elements together in these various phases of her career. And then also just the depth and wonder of the lyrics, and how she combines not only a word she hates, confession, let's say autobiographical material, but observation, humor, lots of fascinating references, and then that just like talent she has for the perfect phrase. So, I think that I didn't know the richness of her entire catalog. And that's really something in the book, by the way, that's important, is that it covers the whole span of her career. And I give as much time to like Dog Eat Dog and Chalk Mark in a Rainstorm and Taming the Tiger as I do to, Ladies of the Canyon, because I feel that those works deserve to be appreciated as well.
Absolutely. And that I think that's one of the things that makes your book so stand out from all the other biographies that are out there of her. And, speaking of which, this is not like a standard biography in a lot of ways, I think it's almost more of a travelogue in some interesting ways. So how did you settle on that form? And, why was that aspect really interesting to you?
Yeah, maybe I could read a couple paragraphs.
Yes, please.
This is just from the introduction. It kind of sets out what I'm up to. Okay. What often happens to legends like Mitchell, not as people necessarily, but as subjects of the world's impassioned interest, is that they get stuck within the edifice of fame. In some ways, they become monuments themselves, solid structures built from the aspects of themselves that others love most. Joni Mitchell, the misunderstood musical genius, the emblematic free woman, the sad girl's or boy's best imaginary friend, has solidified into a series of qualities and traits rather than remaining a dynamic force running on both magic and flaws. She is open tunings, confessional songwriting, jazz rock. She is gammon old crone, a childless mother, a true blue lover, leaving before the sun comes up. She is always in her own category, so relatable, ultimately unknowable. In truth, she's all of these things, but reducing her to any of them turns her into stone. Mitchell's music chases and challenges society's assumptions about what a woman and an artist can be. Any singular view of her artistry and her influence diminishes it. I'm taking Mitchell's lead on this. I feel sometimes like I'm a multi-phrenic person, she once said, apparently inventing a term psychologists would later use to describe the condition of having many selves and self-representations that conflict. Mitchell put it more plainly. Will the real me stand up, you know? My goal has been to follow Joni Mitchell as she's drifted and flown and to chart the rhythms of her inquiries. Her self-conception begins in movement. When asked to define herself, she rarely calls herself a musician first, saying that since she was a child, she's been a dancer and a painter, shimmying with the boys and the bad girls in a Saskatoon dive, wrecking her stockings, reaching her arms overhead to make brush strokes on a canvas, opening up unimagined vistas with a smear of paint. A portrait hardens and becomes lifeless when its maker loses track of the breath, the living presence of her subject. A constantly shifting thing, blurry, then focused, then dissolving, then clear, then different. The light has changed and strives for something absolute. A map maker must be open to new routes. People are not definitive. Neither is any one story. That is the point of Mitchell's songs. Life is stranger and bigger than that. And people, even geniuses, are smaller, human, always incomplete. Every legend is also one of us. So that's kind of my statement of purpose.
If that doesn't intrigue you to start diving into the book pretty soon, I don't know what will. You know, we recently hosted another event at the library with one of our NPR colleagues, Alison McCabe, who had a great book out about Sinead O'Connor, who recently passed. And she also uses a similar tactic in her book where she, she's playing with form. And I talked to her about how she came to include her own experiences in the book, which is something that you do here. So, how did you come to weave your own story and perspective into the narrative?
Well, that's something, and I know you also come from alternative weeklies, and that's really something I learned writing for alternative weeklies, which is really the foundation of my career. I started in Seattle as a teenager at this publication called The Rocket, but really started at the SF Weekly in San Francisco. And then I worked at the Village Voice. I know if all y'all know about the Village Voice. There's a great new oral history of the Village Voice by Trisha Romano. By the way, I highly recommend it. It's called The Freaks Come Out to Write. Anyway, at the Voice in the 90s when I was there, it was a golden age for this kind of inquiry, sort of personal writing that also was cultural criticism. People like Lisa Jones and Greg Tate and Donna Minkowitz and Cindy Carr, all these amazing writers, Amy Taubin, and I really learned from them as peers and mentors. So I always was doing this kind of writing. But I also have noticed in recent years that it seems to be a place where biography is going. There was Lily Analich's book about Eve Babbitt's that came out recently, or the book My Carson McCullers, or the essays of Olivia Lang and Leslie Jameson, some of which are biography, but some of which are more like cultural inquiry, and Claire Dederer's great book, Monsters, authority comes, I think in our moment, we really believe that personal experience infers authority. Now, we could argue about that, but it seems to be something that's resonating with people. So it came kind of naturally to put some personal elements into this book. At the same time, the person that's me in this book is also the struggler, you know? It's also the one who's like, I don't know if I agree. I don't know if I don't know if I'm having a moment with Joni or not. And then over the course of the book, I think you see me becoming more invested, more identifying more. As I say at one point, there's points where she kind of turns around on the path ahead of me and looks at me, and figuratively, that is. And so I hope it's also the story of someone getting to know her work.
Oh, and so it is. And we already mentioned this is not your typical sort of biography in the sense of its form, but some readers might be surprised that you didn't actually speak to Joni Mitchell for this book. In some ways, this book reminds me a lot of our Canadian writer Michael Barclay's book about the Tragically Hip, where he also interviewed many people around the band to get a sense of what they were all about. So similarly, like you've interviewed so many people who can shine a light on her life and her work, but not Joni herself. So what was behind that choice?
Well, in some ways it was initially kind of practical, because when I started this book, it wasn't that long after she'd suffered her aneurysm, and it was unclear if she was really ever going to speak or give an interview again. So as I built the structure of the book, that was happening. Then obviously she starts emerging, and it seems like she's more present, and I do know Brandi Carlile, so I kind of was keeping track of that, but by that time I really realized that I really wanted to be able to do two things. One, to feel free to say what I felt was necessary to say, including critical things, including difficult things, and two, I also wanted to kind of be in the position of the listener and the fan and the person for whom this artist is somewhat distant, because that's what most of our experience is of popular artists and popular musicians. And I did not want to write an authorized biography. I didn't want to, have this like official story. That exists. There's a few great books. Michelle Mercer's wonderful book, Will You Take Me As I Am? David Yaffe's Reckless Daughter, that's the definitive biography. And of course, Malcolm Marome's amazing book-length interviews with Joni. So that was there. So I thought, I'll do something different.
And so you've kind of touched on this there, but what sort of freedom did that give you to sort of delve into things in your own way?
It did give me freedom. It also causes some anxiety, though, of course. I'm still like, well, what if she hates it? What if she denounces me or something? But if she does, I'm sorry. It'll be awful, but you guys will all let me cry on your shoulders. No, I don't know. I mean, I do try to be rigorous. So, like, it's not like a fantasia exactly. It's not speculative in that way. My arguments that I make and the connections that I make, I think, are grounded in reality. And even if sometimes I'm making associations that, was I writing an official biography, I might not have been able to make, I don't think any of them are, like super out there or anything like that. So I guess the freedom was to be able to make those associations, which I kind of think that's the essence of criticism too. Criticism is it's not about, good or bad. It's not about like, I'm criticizing your shirt. Why did you wear green? Whatever. That's not what criticism is. Criticism is contextualizing and also listening, deep listening, or if you're an art critic, looking very intently, and then seeing what happens. What happens here? What happens here, And then seeing if you can write and make those associations sing for other people.
Oh, absolutely. And you mentioned earlier about how you didn't sort of just cover the hits. It's really a deep dive into everything that Joni's done. And I think so much focus on Joni and her work usually begins and ends at Blue. But you've given the time and the care to her entire body of work here. So in doing that sort of a deep dive, what did you learn about her artistic arc, would you say, that maybe surprised you or that you were finding really unexpected to learn about?
I didn't realize what like a tech head she was and what a studio rat she was, and in discovering, I knew we all know about the open tunings. I know she's innovative as a guitarist, We know that her songs are innovative in their structures. But, she loved being in the studio. She had a great partner in Henry Louis, the engineer, for much of her career, then later had a great partner in Larry Klein, who co-produced those records in the 80s and continued to work with her after their marriage ended. But she was using synthesizers and tape loops and stuff like that very early on, sampling the drummers of Burundi. She's just doing a lot of creative stuff that wasn't about, oh, I'm bearing my heart to you. It was, I'm a nerd, I'm a music nerd, and I'm, thinking in these really interesting creative ways. And I think, the dominance of Blue in her story, and in her story of Blue also, which is, I was so raw and it just came out of me, which is sometimes she's talked about it that way, has obscured the craft, and the technical genius of throughout her career that is characteristic of her songs.
So interesting. And, you also delve into some really complex territory, including Joni's use of blackface and assuming a black male alter ego in the 70s. And kind of when looking at that time in her career, what sort of understanding or wrestling did you have to do to come to about those decisions that she made?
Well, that was really hard for a few different reasons. That was probably the point. I do have a chapter in the book. It's called For Art's Sake. How many of y'all know about the Art Nouveau persona? Just raise your hands, or some of you. Less of you than I would have expected. So in the mid-70s, as she was in the height of her working with jazz musicians, including Wayne Shorter and lots of other people, LA Express, but also way beyond that, she was invited to a Halloween party at Leland Sklar's house, the bass player's house, was walking around in Hollywood, going to get a costume, and as she tells the story, a black man walked by her, and she felt a kind of energy exchange, which, according to her, inspired her to go into a costume shop, buy an afro wig, buy clothing, buy some brown makeup, and dress herself as this character, originally Claude, then Art Nouveau. She went to the party. Legend has it that, no one recognized her. Now, we know this isn't entirely true, but, whatever. And my fact checker, Corinne Cummings, and I, we obsessed about this, how many parties, because it's one of those lore stories that you're not sure exactly, were there 2 parties? Was there one? J.D. Souther said he didn't recognize her, but wait, he took her to the party. How could he have not recognized her? Peter Asher said he didn't recognize her, but she was wearing his suit, I don't know. So anyway, but that's how legends happen. After that, and there are photographs, there's at least one photograph of her from that party. After that, she kept the character alive. Those of you who know the cover of Don Juan's Reckless Daughter, she appears in the costume and in the makeup. On the cover of that, Art Nouveau shows up very briefly in the Shadows and Light film, very, very briefly, while she's performing Furry Sings the Blues. And then there's a very odd film, 10-minute film called called The Black Cat in the White Mouse Socks, that she made as part of an omnibus film called Love, that was something like 7 different women filmmakers reflecting on the theme of love. And in that she appears as the character for the whole thing. And it takes place at a costume party. So it's still a costume, but the dialogue suggests that she is questioning what is real and what is a costume. She has said other things over the years that reinforce the idea that she truly feels that within her lives a black man's soul. And, I think, it's 2024. We are talking openly about issues of appropriation, of entitlement, white supremacy, even among our most beloved heroes. And, as a white woman myself, as a white cishet woman myself, I have to question my own entitlement all the time, and what have I think about my own history in this way. So I just wanted to say in this chapter, like, by sharing this story, and it's been in all the biographies, that I don't think we should just brush past it. We really have to talk about it. We really have to think about what it means. How can we love our heroes and also say, that was a really fucked up thing to do, excuse my French. Sorry to the people on streaming line, or whoever sees this. And so that's all I really wanted to say. But it was really hard because on the one hand, I was sure that this would make the specter of Joni is like haunting me and that she'd be mad. On the other hand, I felt like I had to, my white entitlement manifested by me being like, will my black friends like this? Am I doing this in the right way? Will my non-white friends think I'm, doing this in the right way? Which is another form of entitlement, really. Like, why am I putting that burden on my non-white friends? So I was in a total mess and a knot about this, which I talk about in the chapter. Thank God I had some good guides. There's a wonderful scholar, Miles Greer, who I have a dialogue with in the book about it. I had some other friends who helped me and read the chapter. And so really that's all I wanted to do, is I wanted to say, okay, here's all the ways people have talked about this, and they tend to like kind of excuse her. Well, she was a woman and she was oppressed, thus she felt identification, with black men. Or, well, she inhabited this kind of nether region between identities, and therefore she had fluid identity in a lot of ways. I said, okay, but. And that's all I really wanted to end on, was that kind of, okay, but, and let's live in that but, okay? Let's live in the discomfort that we feel about this.
So well said. And
I have one more thing to say. I have to mention that, sorry, I'm the worst person to be interviewed because I just talk, blah, blah, blah. Talking, chicken squawking.
no, I think that's the best way to be interviewed.
I just have to say that this is, I'm sure, a coincidence, but after my galley was out, so I couldn't change it, Don Juan has been reissued. It's being reissued as part of the latest in the archival series, different cover. She's changed the cover, and I have heard from people who know that was definitely her decision. So, right on, Joni.
In sort of a similar vein, you examine her position as a female artist coming up, especially in the 60s folk scene. What was she coming up against as a woman in that world?
Well, I'm dripping all over myself. Where do we begin? I mean, oh man, like in the let's go all the way back to like the folk revival scene, right? So when she's first starting out, and she first becomes audible to the public really as part of this duo with her then brief husband Chuck Mitchell. And it's funny to go back and read stuff about them. There's some articles and about them when they were living in Detroit, and he's really kind of a dominant figure, even though they all are like, she's writing songs, but he's the man, and whatever. So I think from the beginning, like, there's this question of, can you make it on your own if you're not in a partnership with a man? And there were people, Buffy St. Marie, for example, was a mentor of hers early on, and others, of course, Joan Baez, of course, but so often, even just think about Joan Baez, like, Joan Baez was the hugest star. She was on the cover of Time magazine, but when we were coming up, we're like, Joan Baez, isn't she that one who like dated Bob Dylan? What, So that's the thing, By the time she gets to Laurel Canyon, she gets into this boy gang. And that boy gang is, centered around 4 guys, Crosby, Stills, Nash, and Young. But there were others in the circle. And she really, like, ran around with the guys a lot. I mean, I don't mean that that sounded off color. I don't mean that way. It's really, I mean, like, she palled around with men. Like, they were other David Blue, whoever. There were she had a lot of male friends and mostly worked with men as well. I think that was something she enjoyed. I think she's talked about being a tomboy as a child, preferring to play with boys. I think she likes the company of men, but I also think she's no dummy, and realized strategically, that if she could be seen as a peer and not a helpmate or a wife or the one making the sandwiches, then her talent could shine in a way that would be less obscured than other women in the scene. So I talk about that Laurel Canyon, I talk about how other women were viewed and how they dealt with it. They all dealt with it differently, Carole King compartmentalized. She had 2 daughters, but kind of kept her home life away from the studio. Cass Elliot was the hostess with the mostest. Michelle Phillips was the beautiful ingenue who had the worst husband ever, and just kind of had to find her way through that. There's lots of examples, but for Joni, it was like, I can stand with you. Absolutely, I can melt your face off with my guitar, and I look good in a granny dress. So it's like she was gender switching a bit.
Yeah, absolutely. Obviously we cannot be here in this space without acknowledging that we're right in Yorkville, which is where Joni Mitchell got her start. And we can't have you here in Canada without asking you what you think her Homeland's influence on her was.
Yeah, huge, fundamental. I mean, in an original draft of the book, I had a chapter on Joni's Canadian accent, which I mean literally and figuratively. Because I do think when you think about it, like she sings in a certain way, and she doesn't sing in a certain way that I feel is connected to her Canadianness. So a lot of American singers, especially at that time, maybe we hear it more in the men than the women, but they slip into, a lot of white American singers slip into a kind of an affected African American, or affected by African American blues, even Dylan, like, what is that? He's from Minneapolis. Whatever. But assuming something, appropriating, as we were talking about, but that never was Joni's style, And I think initially you hear a lot of Joan Baez's influence in what she does, but as she finds her own voice, I don't know, the Canadianness, the vowels, the cadences, I hear that. So that's one thing, the voice. Secondly, her relationship to the natural world. She grew up in a semi-rural, sort of on the edge of the suburbs place. And I think, she always returned to, although she didn't return to Saskatchewan or Toronto, she went to the West Coast. But, I think she associated her homeland with, Canada, right? It's like peace. It's a place she could go to regroup. And she did, And some of her albums are very much about that, like For the Roses, for example.
Yeah, so true. And, I think the title of your book, Traveling, which comes from in a way, from the opening lines of the first song on Blue, it captures the essence of the narrative of the book, which is that sense that Joni was constantly moving, artistically, literally. So what did you learn about, why she was a nomad in that way?
That's a great question. I can and will and do probably psychoanalyze her more than I should. We could talk about what happens to. Okay, first I want to say, as an adoptive mom, I hesitate to talk about the adoption experience, anyone else's adoption experience. So I'm qualifying this, but there was a restlessness that might have been associated with her drive. Sarah said something about this, I think. There was a sense of destiny, of mission. But honestly, I don't know. I think part of it was just practical, It's like touring musician, right? And going where her drive took her. She has a lot of drive. She had a lot of sense of herself as exceptional, I think, and she was encouraged to feel that way. So everywhere she went, a new door opened. Not like she didn't have hard times, struggles, she did, but you know, she is that generational talent, and people notice, so a new door opened to another door, right? And then I also just think she's an adventurer, you know? Like, I have this section about Florida, and I didn't know anything about that. I would love to see a documentary about this sometime. I think someone was telling me maybe there's one in the works, but, you know, Coral Gables, Coconut Grove, Florida neighborhood in Miami area was sort of like a mirror of Greenwich Village. A lot of the promoters, including Michael Lang, who started Woodstock, worked down there, and the Woodstock Festival, and even opened like twin sort of southern versions of their clubs. And a lot of artists would go down there to play because it's Miami, you know? It's like February in New York, go to Miami, right? And so she spent some time there, and that's where she, you know, became very close to David Crosby. And I thought that was really interesting little moment. So I was always looking for these little adventures she took, and there's a lot of them. A lot I didn't write about. I didn't write that much about the Greek. There's like whole books about that. So I didn't write that much about the Greek sojourn that she talks so much about on Blue, but she just, yeah, she's a creature of the white lines of the highway, Tab.
I love it.
It's got to keep moving.
And then speaking of moving, in the last few years, we've seen this Joni Renaissance, which has been so great to see. With her return to the stage, artists like Brandi Carlile, which you mentioned, and others are holding her up as this like legend and matriarch. And it's been nice to see her bask in that spotlight a little bit too, right? So why do you think we're seeing this like remarkable influence on music being just recognized in this way right now?
You know, it's such a great moment. As someone who's been in this business for so long and always written, you know, so much about women artists, I've seen a lot of different phases, you know, in which the position of the woman artist changes in popular music. And for a lot of my life, there's been a real feeling of scarcity that I think encourages competitive feelings among women. And I think for older women, that's meant they don't want to have that much to do with younger women, including Joni, who often denounced, even in the 90s, like wouldn't play Lilith Fair, et cetera. And also younger women not wanting to be, you know, overshadowed by their elders. But right now, we're in an amazing moment of like mutual support across genre lines, across racial lines, across national lines, and it's really beautiful. So I think there is this sense of a matrilineage that is being claimed. And so it was really the perfect moment for this to happen. But I've seen it with other artists, like, I don't know, Katie Crutchfield of Waxahachie has been collaborating with Lucinda Williams, for example. And lots of, you know, Shaka Khan, like so many young artists of both pop and R&B are like lifting Shaka up. It's like a constant thing now. And that's really, I mean, it's such a great thing.
It's really great to see. So I'm being told that we're going to turn this over to you guys to ask some great and insightful questions pretty soon. But I can't let you go without asking you, what is your favorite Joni Mitchell song and why?
I hate these questions. I don't know. I mean, it changes like all the time. But my usual, God, there's so many. I love A Strange Boy. You know, that's like a track that's a mystery that I haven't cracked completely yet. Like, who is the strange boy? I love that song because it's like a rock song, and it's a little weird adventure. It's one of those side roads, you know, in her story. So that's from Hajira. I like Paprika Plains, but that's like saying you like Beethoven's Ninth Symphony, you know. I'll single out a song that I like. I love all the Larry stuff, and I'll single out a song that I love that they did that is, I think, the only song where she directly wrote about them breaking up. It's called Last Chance Lost, and it is such a sad song about just a marriage that is falling apart, you know, and it's just so, it's so compact and perfect. So those are a few. That's three. I'm sorry, I couldn't choose one.
Oh, well, I'm sure we can go on.
Yeah, shall I go on?
And powers, everybody.